Hey there, and welcome. Find a comfortable spot. Let your body sink into your bed and take a slow, deep breath. Tonight, we're not just going to listen to history, we're going to travel through it. We'll journey to a world where beauty was a bizarre and dangerous art, where a pale complexion was worth more than gold, and eyebrows were considered optional. Then, we'll shift our gaze to the warriors, the queens, the women who defied their era, trading silk for steel and whispers for battle cries. So dim the lights, close your eyes, and let these echoes of the past guide you into a peaceful sleep. Our journey begins now. Chapter 1. The Canvas of Nobility. Medieval Beauty, Strange Ideals. In the medieval world, long before our modern obsessions with sun-kissed skin, the ultimate symbol of status wasn't a castle or a coronet was your complexion. A deep tan was the mark of the peasant, a sign that one toiled endlessly in the fields under the harsh gaze of the sun. True nobility, however, cultivated a look of profound, almost ghostly paleness. This wasn't just a preference. It was a silent, powerful declaration whispered across banquet halls and royal courts. It said, I am too wealthy, too refined, to ever feel the sun's warmth on my skin. I live a life of leisure, indoors, shielded from the vulgarities of labor. The ideal was a complexion so pale it appeared translucent, a fragile porcelain white that hinted at a life untouched by hardship. It was a look that proudly proclaimed, I have never, not once, had to milk a cow. To achieve this coveted pallor, nature often needed a dangerous, and sometimes deadly, push. The most fashionable tool in a noble woman's arsenal was a fine white powder known as Venetian ceruse, or spirits of Saturn. Its key ingredient? Lead. This toxic concoction was made by allowing lead plates to corrode over vinegar, then scraping off the white crust and grinding it into a fine dust. When applied to the face, neck, and chest, it delivered a flawless, smooth, matte finish, the medieval equivalent of high-definition foundation. But this porcelain perfection came at a terrible price. Lead is a cumulative poison. With daily use, it would seep through the skin, causing hair loss, skin ulcers, tooth decay, and eventually severe nerve damage, organ failure, and death. Ironically, the more the lead damaged the skin, the more powder was needed to cover the blemishes, creating a vicious, fatal cycle. For those seeking less overtly toxic methods, other options were available, though no less strange. Some would soak cloths in vinegar or the acidic juice of unripe grapes to bleach their skin over time. Others created face masks from a paste of crushed pearls and egg whites, which not only promised to lighten the skin, but also left one's cheeks feeling as tight and stiff as a stale, hardened omelet. In some circles, it was even fashionable to simulate delicacy by painting faint blue veins onto the chest and arms, using pigments to create the illusion that one's skin was so thin and noble you could see the blood flowing beneath. But pale skin was only the canvas. Upon this ghostly backdrop, the most striking and bizarre feature was drawn, or rather, erased. Perhaps the most eyebrow-raising trend of the era was, quite literally, the removal of eyebrows. A high, vast, and completely smooth forehead was considered the absolute pinnacle of feminine elegance. It was a sign of intelligence, piety, and aristocratic grace. The forehead became the architectural marvel of the medieval face, a smooth and interrupted dome that suggested a life spent in pensive, spiritual contemplation. Not in the fields. To achieve this noble look, women went to extraordinary and often painful lengths. Eyebrows were not merely thinned or shaped. They were painstakingly plucked into oblivion, one hair at a time. Eyelashes were sometimes thinned as well, to avoid distracting from the vast expanse of the brow. And the manipulation didn't stop there. To push the hairline even further back and create an even larger forehead, women would shave or pluck the hair at their temples and along the crown of their head, inch by painstaking inch. Medieval grooming manuals, in their eerie wisdom, even suggested depilatory creams made from a witch's brew of ingredients: quicklime, arsenic, or even vinegar mixed with cat dung. The goal was to create a face that seemed to begin halfway up the skull. This trend was amplified by the era's extraordinary fashion. The most iconic headwear of the late Middle Ages was the Hennin, that famous towering, cone-shaped hat that looked like a church steeple perched precariously on a woman's head, reaching heights of 2 feet or more. Hennins were constructed from wire frames covered in rich fabrics like silk or velvet. To wear one properly, all of the hair had to be scraped back and hidden, further accentuating the bare, high forehead. The combination of the deathly pale skin, the absent eyebrows, and the impossibly tall Hennin created a silhouette that was serene, otherworldly, and profoundly unnatural, the very definition of high fashion for a 15th century noblewoman. Below the forehead, the desired features were equally specific. A subtle, rosy blush on the cheeks was acceptable, as it suggested youth and fertility, but it had to appear natural. Applying rouge, though obviously, was considered vain and sinful. A sign of deception, women would secretly use beetroot juice or crushed strawberries, dabbing it on carefully and hoping to create a glow that could be plausibly denied if questioned. Oh, this flush, it must be the wind. Lips, too, were to be small and red, like a rosebud. Women would bite them to bring out the color or apply balms made from fat and alkanet root, a plant that yielded a red dye, but the mouth was a place of careful restraint. This brings us to one of the era's most hidden anxieties, the smile. In an age without modern dentistry, a toothy grin was rarely a pleasant sight. Diets heavy in coarse bread and lacking in sugar for most, but also lacking in proper cleaning, meant that tooth decay, gum disease, and missing teeth were commonplace by adulthood. Dental care was rudimentary, often consisting of wiping the teeth with a rough cloth and perhaps a paste of crushed sage or salt. Therefore, the fashionable expression was a demure, closed-lipped smile. Think of the Mona Lisa's subtle, enigmatic expression that was the ideal. It was considered more refined, more mysterious, and it conveniently hid the state of one's dental health. To combat bad breath, people chewed on parsley, cloves, or fennel seeds, turning their mouths into portable herb gardens. A pleasant scent was part of the overall aesthetic of purity and refinement, a fragrant mask for the era's less than fresh realities. And what of the hair, that crowning glory? For women, the medieval gold standard was long, wavy, and, above all, blonde. This ideal was heavily influenced by religious art, where figures like the Virgin Mary were almost always depicted with golden locks, a symbol of purity, youth, and divine grace despite her actual Middle Eastern origins. If you weren't a natural blonde, you took matters into your own hands. Women would concoct hair lightening mixtures of saffron, chamomile, and ash. The most potent recipes call for lye or even animal urine, which were applied to the hair before sitting out in the sun for hours, a practice known as sunbasking. It was a smelly, tedious, and often damaging process, but for the sake of achieving that celestial shimmer, it was deemed worth it. However, this glorious hair was often for private or premarital display. Once a woman was married, her hair was to be covered in public. It was tucked away under veils, nets called kirtles, and elaborate head coverings like the wimple. Showing one's hair freely as a married woman was considered improper, even scandalous. The standards of beauty weren't reserved for women alone. A nobleman in the Middle Ages was also expected to present a carefully curated image. The ideal man was tall and lean, with broad shoulders but a narrow waist. He was not to be overly muscular, as bulky muscles suggested a life of physical labor, something far beneath a man of his station. Instead, he should possess a graceful strength, the kind needed to wield a sword with skill, but not the brute force required to haul barrels. His face was to be well-defined, with a strong jawline and a straight nose, depending on the specific time and region. He might be clean-shaven or sport a neatly trimmed beard and mustache, but it always had to look intentional and well-groomed, never wild. His hair was often worn at shoulder length, sometimes curled with heated tongs to achieve fashionable waves. Like the women, fair hair was often preferred. His posture was paramount. A nobleman did not slouch. He carried himself with an air of effortless superiority and composure. His hands were also an important marker of class. They were expected to be soft and well-kept, with clean, trim nails. The hands of a man who held a falcon or a pen, not a shovel. His clothing was tailored to enhance this ideal silhouette. With padded shoulders and cinched waists, he was, in essence, the physical embodiment of his social standing, refined, controlled, and naturally superior. To be beautiful in the Middle Ages, for both men and women, was not about looking natural. It was about looking symbolic. It was a full-time performance, a constant and meticulous effort to craft an appearance that reflected not who you were, but what you were, a member of the privileged few, set apart from the common earth by the very paleness of your skin and the deliberate elegance of your posture. Hey there, and welcome. Find a comfortable spot. Let your body sink into your bed and take a slow, deep breath. Tonight, we're not just going to listen to history. We're going to travel through it. We'll journey to a world where beauty was a bizarre and dangerous art, where a pale complexion was worth more than gold, and eyebrows were considered optional. Then, we'll shift our gaze to the warriors, the queens, the women who defied their era, trading silk for steel and whispers for battle cries. So dim the lights, close your eyes, and let these echoes of the past guide you into a peaceful sleep. Our journey begins now. Chapter 2. The Edge of the Sword. Warrior women who defied history. Our first stop on this new journey is not in a castle, but on the windswept plains of ancient Eurasia, nearly 3,000 years ago. Here, among the nomadic Scythian tribes, a different kind of womanhood thrived. These were not the Amazons of Greek myth, but their real-life inspiration. The Greek historian Herodotus wrote of them with astonishment, describing tribes where young women were not permitted to marry until they had first killed an enemy in battle. For centuries, this was dismissed as fantasy, but in modern times, archaeology has proven him right, digging into the burial mounds, or kurgans, that dot the steppe from the Black Sea to Siberia. Scientists have uncovered something extraordinary. The graves of women buried as elite warriors. They were laid to rest not with spindles and looms, but with the tools of war, bows, quivers full of arrows, daggers, and swords. Many of their skeletons bear the brutal marks of combat, skulls cleaved by axes, arrowheads lodged in their spines. These were the Scythian archer women. From a young age, they learned to ride horses with astounding skill and to fire a bow with deadly accuracy, both on foot and at a full gallop. In the harsh, open plains, where raids from rival tribes were a constant threat, everyone had to be a defender. This was not a rebellion against their culture. It was their culture, a world where a woman's worth was measured not by her dowry, but by her aim and her courage. From the steppes, we journey forward in time to the 1st century CE, where the mighty Roman Empire was a seemingly unstoppable machine of conquest and order. But in the remote, mist-shrouded province of Britannia, it met its match in a flame-haired Celtic queen named Boudica. She was the wife of Prasutagus, king of the Iceni tribe, a proud and wealthy people in what is now eastern England. For years, Prasutagus had maintained a fragile peace with Rome, acting as a client king. It was a gilded cage. He kept his title and some of his wealth, but his kingdom was under Roman authority. In an attempt to protect his family after his death, he made a will naming the Roman emperor as co-heir alongside his two daughters. He hoped this gesture of loyalty would ensure his kingdom's and his family's security. It did the opposite. Upon his death, Rome saw not an ally to respect, but an opportunity to seize the local Roman procurator, a man driven by greed, declared the Iceni kingdom and all its lands to be Roman property. Roman soldiers descended on the royal household like locusts, looting its treasures. When Boudica protested this violation, she was subjected to the ultimate humiliation. She was publicly stripped and flogged with whips, a punishment reserved for common slaves, and in an act of unspeakable cruelty designed to shatter the Iceni bloodline and spirit. Her two young daughters were brutally assaulted by Roman soldiers. It was a calculated act of state-sponsored terror, designed to break her people, and to show all Britannia the price of defying Rome. Instead, it ignited a firestorm, consumed by a righteous and terrible fury. Boudica rose from her humiliation not as a broken victim, but as a vessel of vengeance. Her personal tragedy became a rallying cry for all the British tribes who had suffered under Rome's arrogance and heavy taxes. The Roman historian Tacitus describes her as a terrifying figure of towering height, with a harsh, commanding voice and a torrent of fiery red hair that cascaded down to her waist. Dressed in a multicolored tunic and a thick cloak, she wore a massive golden torque around her neck, a symbol of her nobility. Grasping a spear, she addressed her growing army from a chariot, her voice ringing with rage and sorrow as she called her people to war. Her forces descended on the Roman settlements with breathtaking brutality. They first targeted Camulodunum, the Roman capital of Britain and a symbol of their oppression. The city, filled with retired Roman legionaries, was undefended. It was burned to the ground, its inhabitants slaughtered. Next came Londinium, the seed of modern London, a bustling hub of commerce. It too was razed, its people shown no mercy. The rebellion was not just a war, it was an extermination. It is estimated that over 70,000 Romans and their sympathizers perished in a wave of fire and blood. For a brief, terrifying moment, it seemed as if Boudica would drive the Romans from Britain entirely. But the Romans, under the skilled governor Suetonius Paulinus, regrouped. Though vastly outnumbered, he used Roman discipline to his advantage, choosing his ground carefully, a narrow gorge with the forest at his back. Here, the sheer numbers of Boudica's passionate but chaotic army were a disadvantage. They were funneled into a killing zone where the disciplined, interlocking shields and short, stabbing swords of the Roman legionaries proved devastating. The rebellion was crushed in a single bloody day, facing capture and the inevitable humiliation being paraded through the streets of Rome. Boudica is said to have taken poison, choosing to die a free queen. She remains an eternal symbol of defiance, a woman who answered tyranny not with surrender, but with thunder. Now, let us travel across the globe to medieval Japan. During the blood-soaked Genpei War of the late 12th century, this was a brutal civil war that tore the country apart, a struggle for supremacy between the great Minamoto and Taira clans. Here, in a world governed by the rigid warrior code of Bushido, the battlefield was almost exclusively the domain of men. But in the army of the warlord Minamoto no Yoshinaka, one figure stood out with a deadly brilliance: Amo Gozen. She was an Onna-bugeisha, a female warrior of the samurai class. They were rare, but they were real, trained from a young age in the use of weapons to defend their homes and honor. Tamo, however, was no mere defender. She was a front-line commander. The epic tale of the hike describes her with a poet admiration, noting she was not only especially beautiful, with white skin, long hair, and charming features, but also a remarkably strong archer. And as a swordswoman, she was a warrior worth 1,000, ready to confront a demon or a god. She was a master of the naginata long polearm with a curved blade, a weapon that allowed for graceful, sweeping attacks and was favored by women for its reach. She rode into the thick of combat alongside her lord, her skill and ferocity earning her a reputation that preceded her. She was not a battlefield ornament. She was a force of nature. In the final, desperate battle of Awazu, Yoshinaka's small force was surrounded, facing certain death. He turned to Tamo. He told her to flee, because it would be a dishonor for him to die in his last battle with a woman by his side. It was a heartbreaking command, a reflection of the era's rigid values. Reluctantly, Tamo prepared to leave, but not before proving her worth one last time. As she rode away, she was confronted by a famously strong enemy captain. In a stunning display of skill and power, Tamo charged her horse directly at him, dragged him down, pinned his struggling body with her powerful arms, and calmly severed his head with her dagger. Then, as if nothing had happened, she discarded the armor and rode away into the mists of history. Her ultimate fate remains a mystery, a blank page in a bloody book, but her legend never faded. Tamo Gozen stands as a powerful symbol of a woman who didn't just exist in a man's world of war, but who excelled in it. Our final journey takes us to the West African kingdom of Dahomey in the 18th and 19th centuries, a powerful state built on military might and trade. This kingdom was protected by one of the most formidable and disciplined military units in history, an all-female army known as the Agaji. European colonizers, in a mix of fear and fascination, called them the Dahomey Amazons. But this was no myth. These women were the king's elite frontline troops, a core part of Dahomey's war machine. They were recruited from across the kingdom. Some were free Dahomeyan women who volunteered, seeking status and influence. Others were captives from enemy tribes, and some were even wives of the king who had displeased him, offered a choice between execution and joining the ranks. Once inducted, they underwent a training regimen of unimaginable intensity. They ran barefoot through fields of sharp thorns to learn to ignore pain, climbed massive walls studded with spikes, and were desensitized to killing through ritual and brutal exercises. They swore oaths of celibacy and absolute loyalty to the king, becoming, in effect, his third-class wives. But their duty was not domestic. Their duty was war. They were organized into different units: huntresses, riflewomen, and the feared reapers, who wielded massive, razor-sharp machetes called bubo. Their greatest weapon, however, was psychological. To see them advance in battle silent, disciplined, and utterly fearless, their songs rising in eerie harmony before a charge, was to witness a force that seemed to defy human limits. During the Franco-Dahomeyan Wars in the late 1890s, the Agaji faced the technologically superior French Foreign Legion. They charged directly into the fire of modern rifles and machine guns, fighting with a ferocity that stunned and terrified the colonial commanders. An account from a French officer describes watching an Agaji warrior vault over a barricade, kill a man with her blade, and then calmly wipe it clean before continuing the charge. Though the kingdom was eventually conquered by superior firepower, the Agaji fought to the very end, defending their capital street by street in brutal hand-to-hand combat. In a world that so often silences women, the Agaji were a roar. They were living proof that courage, discipline, and skill know no gender, a legacy of strength so powerful that it continues to inspire stories to this day. And so, our journey through the echoes of history comes to a close. We have walked through to very different worlds tonight, lit by two very different kinds of light. First, we stood in the flickering candle light of medieval courts, where beauty was a fragile, demanding performance. We saw faces painted into pale masks of nobility, foreheads bared as a sign of piety, and smiles carefully hidden behind rosebud lips. It was a world where a woman's power was often in her stillness, her silence, her flawless, almost untouchable appearance. A world of quiet, desperate artistry, painted with poison and prayer. Then, we left those halls behind and stepped into the stark sunlight of the battlefield. We stood beside queens and warriors whose beauty was not in their complexion, but in their courage. We heard the defiant roar of Boudica, a queen who chose vengeance over victimhood. We witnessed the deadly grace of Tamogozan, a warrior who was a force of nature in a world of men, and we felt the earth tremble under the disciplined tread of the Agaji, women who became the unbreakable spear of their kingdom. Their power was not in their silence, but in their actions. Their legacy was not written on their skin, but carved into the memory of the world with fire and steel. From the silent, powdered faces to the fierce, determined gazes, the stories of these women remind us that strength takes many forms. Some fought battles against social expectation. Others fought them with swords and shields. Each navigated the world they were given with the tools they had. Each was a survivor in her own right. Now, let these stories settle. Let the echoes of the past soften and fade like embers glowing in the dark before they turn to peaceful ash. There is nothing left to do now but rest. Feel the weight of the day begin to lift from your shoulders. Let go of every thought, every worrying. Allow the gentle quiet to envelop you like a soft, warm blanket. Your journey is over. It is time to drift peacefully and deeply into your dreams. Sleep well,